Well, hello everyone in the football world. My name is Sanders, and I am the host of the Head Couch Analyst Show. As usual, I'm joined by my co-host Pardue over here. How was your day at work?
It's been boring. My boss is interviewing for new jobs, and so he's been in and out. So I've mostly been chilling. All.
Doing a ton of stuff for that. Are you set to take over?
No, not really. And they're not hiring any other help inside the warehouse right now. See how that'll go.
Oh boy. Well, that sucks. I I personally I had an easy day at work, I should say. But hey, our listeners are not here for us to talk about our work. They're here for us to talk about. I'm sure what they saw the title was free agents and what's going to happen come I guess the third, fourth wave of free agency, the time where you forgot that one big name that was still in free agency happens every year, and then they sign to a team, whether it's a 1 year deal, and maybe they just don't sign on at all. You know, so we can dive into that. We've got 12 players for you, is what we're going to do. Obviously, the big ones like Cam Newton and Jared Davey and Clowney, we are going to leave for the last two because those will probably take up the most time. So we're going to start with the ones that we feel are less priority for teams. So, for example, the first one being Delaney Walker. We're going to talk about what they provided last year and the team that we think they're going to go to. So let's talk about Delaney Walker here. So Delaney Walker was, obviously a tight end. I feel like more people know who Delaney Walker is based upon fantasy football than anything else. Because I'm sure if I mentioned Delaney Walker to anybody in my family, they'd be like, "Who?" And he was big for the Titans for a bit, but
He's been a really consistent tight end throughout his entire career. Like he's had a very consistent and good career. I mean, he's never been a big name. He's never been that flashy guy. But in a league that doesn't really have many elite players at the tight end position, he's definitely been in the upper echelon of that.
Yeah. So he finished his year last year with the Titans, and he finished it out on injured reserve, just like he did the year prior. He has not finished a season since 2017, so that's probably a red marker for some teams. I imagine Delaney Walker is the kind of guy where he's not picked up till training camp. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, I was predicting the same thing. Like in a situation where maybe a team starting or backup tight end goes down, or a situation like that, or where they need a camp body and he makes a roster there. As of right now, given his injury situation the last couple of years, like you said, that's a pretty big red flag. And given his age, like he's the second oldest person on the list of players that we have in front of us right now at age 35. And you could say he's got a couple extra years left in him, but like you said, ending his last playing a complete season his last 3 years isn't a good look. And then in addition to the majority of the teams, I feel being pretty set at the tight end position, probably not a good chance he's going to be signed anytime soon unless an injury or the teams are just looking for an extra body.
So do you think this is a guy that would sign on to a contender, or do you think he's going to take any team he can get onto? Because he knows he's not going to be that high in demand.
At this rate, I doubt there's much market right now for tight ends, starting tight ends, or even backup tight ends in the league right now. Because, like I said, I feel like most teams are pretty set at that position right now. And in the grand scheme, tight end is an extremely valuable skill position amongst NFL teams. So right now, I'm sure he would love to go to a contender, but I think given his value and his position, it's probably going to be first come, first serve for him, and he's just going to try and tag on wherever he can.
I imagine that too, because the places that I got him going, I had 3 in my head. 2 were contenders, 1 was not. The first one being the Panthers. They need a tight end. They haven't had one for a while. Not at least not one worth, talking about. Not that they probably don't perform at a pro level, but not one that eye pops out. They might, and right. Plus they need another pass catcher for Teddy Bridgewater, so I think that would be nice for Carolina. Baltimore just traded away Hayden Hurst, so I imagine that it's possible that if they wanted another pass catcher, especially for Lamar, they could take Delaney Walker. And then Pittsburgh was the other one. Again, they have Vance McDonald and things like that, I understand, but they haven't had a guy pretty much more or less. I mean, Jesse James left, and since Heath Miller, you haven't had that guy who's gonna move the chains for you. So if you wanted to kick the tires on Delaney Walker and try and provide another receiver for the Steelers and for Big Ben coming back, I think that would be nice as well. So those were the three teams I imagined him going to. What do you think?
Yeah, I had a pretty tough time trying to pin down a team for Delaney, but surprisingly enough, the Panthers were actually the team that I picked because I feel like they don't have many pass catchers, and while like Delaney Walker is definitely towards the very far back end of his career, and he's not anywhere near the player he once was, I feel like that'd be a good like middle of the field threat for Teddy Bridgewater when he's coming in and trying to learn a new offense. Once again, so yeah, that's actually the team.
Alrighty, so it sounds like we're thinking the Panthers here. I honestly, I think in reality, I think he'd be best fit for Pittsburgh, but it wouldn't surprise me if he went to a team like the Panthers. Like you were saying, I don't think he has the ability to be picky or choose where he goes at the moment. So that might just be the reality of where he's at in his career.
Right.
Alrighty. So let's move on to our next guy, which is Tony Jefferson. So Tony Jefferson was a guy who was a fan favorite in Baltimore, fan favorite in Arizona as well. He's been enjoyed wherever he's been, but he got injured a second time while he was in Baltimore, and Chuck Clark, a guy who I believe they drafted in the 7th round. I'd have to be corrected on that if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure he was drafted in the 6th or 7th round. But Chuck Clark was a guy who came in once Tony Jefferson was injured, and he was actually performing better than Tony Jefferson did. So when the Ravens had to make a decision on who to keep, they decided to keep Chuck Clark, the younger guy, and a guy who they signed to a 3-year, $16 million deal. In other words, they got an upgrade over Tony Jefferson for way cheaper, essentially $5.3 million a year, which is a massive steal. Again, Eric DeCosta doing some real wizard shit at the GM position like he has been the last year. So I think he has a lot of value to provide, but teams might be concerned that like Delaney Walker, he has ended his last 2 seasons, on the injury report.
Mm-hmm. For me, like you said, he was a fan favorite. I've always been a big fan of Tony Jefferson. He's never been much of a really great playmaking safety. He's been a safety who's really excelled inside the box and up on the line of scrimmage. He's one of the best safeties in the NFL when it comes to blitzing. So I feel like if he were to be signed to a team, he'd be a guy. I don't feel like he would be a starter. He would be more of a sub-package kind of guy. I feel like at this point too, he would probably be pretty cheap coming off an ACL, and like you said, ending his last 2 seasons on injured reserve. I feel like he would probably end up being pretty cheap, and he'd be a good weapon for a defense if he were to be brought on. Again, I have a hard time picking a team for safeties because I feel like kind of like the tight end position, it's not super valuable anymore. And I feel like you can have a pretty easy time finding safeties that are serviceable in the NFL. For example, the Arizona Cardinals last year, they got a safety in the supplemental draft that we're all really excited about, and his name is Jalen Thompson. He performed really well down the stretch, and we all have a love-hate relationship, I feel, with Pro Football Focus, but he was given one of the highest Pro Football Focus ratings in the last month of the season amongst safety. So we're all really excited about him, but I mean, and it might be the bias coming out here because I really love Tony Jefferson, but that's kind of where I see Tony Jefferson fitting. I don't believe he would be the starter in Arizona. I believe he'd be a sub-package guy you would use in certain like nickel and dime packages and using him off the edge to blitz or coming out of the box to blitz. I feel like that's where he would fit. Another place where I could potentially see him fitting in is potentially the Cowboys. They've been, as we all know, they've been looking for a safety, and I feel like that is a team he would be starting on. They've been kind of looking for safety help for a couple of years now. Obviously, all the trade rumors about them being interested in Jamal Adams and Earl Thomas and so on and so forth. Obviously, Tony Jefferson isn't quite on the level of those two guys, but he would fill a need and a hole on that Cowboys team.
Yeah, for me, I think the Cowboys are a good choice. I think Tony Jefferson would actually be suited to go to. Now, hear me out on this, okay? I think he'd be suited to actually go to Miami. So they already have two solid corners in like Xavier Howard and Byron Jones, right? But they don't necessarily have like a name safety, and they're starting strong safety. I forget his first name, and his last name is Rowe. Constantly got burned last year. Very vividly, I remember him being burned by Brown last year. That was the one where I texted you and I flipped my shit that Lamar threw like a 90-yard touchdown. But
Yeah.
and I was like, he can do it. He can throw. Ah! But yeah, I think they would benefit from having a strong safety who can actually tackle in open space. I think that's what Tony Jefferson provides the most. Not just, blitzing like you were saying, but the ability to tackle in the open field. He's always been a hard hitter, and he's good at that. So I think they need that in the back. They're fine at corner. I think they're not elite, but they're fine. Like you can get by with Xavier Howard and Byron Jones, it's totally fine. But I think you need a strong safety who can tackle in the open field and stop the run game. Especially when your line isn't like anything special. I think Tony Jefferson would be really nice for the Dolphins, and that's where I would put him at.
Yeah, I can agree with that. And like you were saying, he's a hard hitting, he's an open field tackler kind of guy. And like I was saying, he's a box guy. He's a box safety. He's not the free safety type who's going to go up and get a bunch of interceptions like that. He's going to be the guy who's going to make the tough tackles, stop the run, and fill the box. That's just the kind of player he is.
I mean, I guess if he was to sign for a contender, Seattle probably wouldn't be the worst place to go either.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, Seattle doesn't have a ton of cap space. I believe you were saying prior to us starting the.
And you don't need a ton of cap space to sign Tony Jefferson, I feel, either.
Exactly. I think you were saying they had about $8 million in cap.
Yeah.
I feel like Tony Jefferson would probably be in the $4 to $5 million range. Maybe that's a little cheap.
I think 4 to 5 sounds about right.
Right. So I would probably think about 4 to 5 million.
He was making $6 million per year with Baltimore. So that's a pretty good.
Yeah,
I imagine the 3 to 5 area is what he would be in. He'd be less than what he was being paid before. All right. Who do we have next? We have Snacks Harrison, Damon Harrison. So when you talked about guys that you thought it was super hard to, place a team for them, Damon Harrison was actually the one I struggled with the most.
Really? That was probably one of my easier ones. I feel like there's a lot of teams that could always use some talent and or depth on the defensive line. So I actually got a few teams in mind for Damon.
Okay, sure. I totally see what you're saying, but for a guy who only had like 2 sacks last year, I understand he's a defensive tackle and whatnot, right? But his tackles were also lower than what they were in years prior. Like, it just seemed like he had like a step back for Detroit.
Yeah, he did seem to have an off year, and if I remember correctly, after the season completed, weren't there rumors coming out that he was contemplating retirement? I was trying to look for an article on that earlier today, but I couldn't find it. But I almost positively remember that he was contemplating retirement at the end of the season.
I remember he told, I think, reporters that like back in November or whatever, something like that.
Mm.
But anyways,
It,
I know his production wasn't as big as it, used to be. I also know he wanted to get out of Detroit. Shocker, a defensive player wanted to get out of Detroit.
right.
That's
Any
not
player out of Detroit.
that's not new. So I just have a tough time of like deciding like where do you put a guy that for a team. I understand not everyone wanted to be in Detroit, but if you're a coach, right, you're reading, all right, so you didn't like where you were being coached, so you gave us less production, right? Are you going to take a risk on a player that, you know, all relationships start out great until they're not anymore? And frankly, you can still like not have a good relationship and still play well for a team. Like for example, I think the most recent time we saw this was probably Earl Thomas with Seattle. I think he was starting to have a career year in those first like 5 games before he got hurt, right? If I remember correctly, he was on his way to another career year, and he broke his leg and then he flipped off his sideline, which really wasn't for his teammates. It was meant for the owner and the general manager and whatnot, obviously, for not getting a deal done and for him being afraid that he would get hurt and not have a deal done, which is exactly what happened. But that's a case of a player not being happy about his situation and still performing well, whereas like Harrison's done this twice now. If you remember, he did this with the Jets as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's hard to. It was hard for me to put him in a place where I'm like, well, where could he go, and he would like it, and the coaches would be fine with him. Say, where did you have him going?
So for me, I looked at teams that I feel like could use some help on the defensive line, and I mean, I feel like almost any team could use a good Damon Harrison on their defensive line. But more specifically, I was looking at the Cowboys, the Texans, and the Seahawks. The Seahawks don't really have any names on their defensive line, let alone their defense. It's not an impressive lineup when you really look at it. But those were the teams that I had picked out. I feel like the Texans could use after like losing a guy like DJ Reader. I feel like Damon Harrison could go in there and step up and not necessarily fill that hole because DJ Reader is a very good defensive tackle and he's in his prime. But he could go in there and, fill a void, if you will, on that defensive line. And the Cowboys, when you look at their overall defensive lineup, it's pretty good, especially in the front seven. But I feel like their defensive front is a little bit lacking. Obviously, you got guys like Jalen Smith on the outside, but that's an edge, and I feel like you need someone who can plug up the run and generate some pass rush from the interior, and I feel like Damon Harrison could fit that billing for the Cowboys.
I like that. I actually got another Texas team that I thought about, which was the Texans. I was actually going over the defense with Bootleg Fantasy yesterday, and they have nobody. They have Whitney Cornelius, or however you say his name, and J.J. Watt. That's about it. Everyone else on their team, like, I recognize their names, like Bradley Roby and whatnot, but no one, like, pops off, and everyone, I'm like, yeah, that's pretty average. And while Damus Harrison is average, too, I will say I've not heard of the people that are on the defensive line for the Texans. Admittingly, this is not my job to know them either, to be fair to myself. But either way, it seems, especially after the deal with Timmy Jernigan went through last week. If you remember, Timmy Jernigan was supposed to sign onto the Texans, and he said the deal fell through, so he's not. Obviously, they're in the market for, an interior defensive lineman. So if you can't get Timmy Jernigan, I feel someone like, and it's Whitney Marcellus, by the way. That just popped up in my head. If you can't get Timmy Jernigan, maybe a guy like Mike Daniels or, Damus Harrison would be nice. Or sorry, Damon Harrison would be nice. So I guess no matter what, we got him going to Texas.
Yeah, I would probably say so, yeah.
Alrighty, so the next guy we have on here, I actually don't have him going to a team. And that's Eric Reed. Eric Reed is a fantastic story in the NFL. I should start with that. A guy who was a hometown hero in Kansas City, then left the NFL for cancer, beat it, and came back, and had a decent year. But then he had a terrible year the following year, was released, signed a 3-year deal with the Panthers, and then they cut him after 1 year on that deal. Usually when safeties or corners don't have it, they don't have it anymore. Like,
Right.
after Ed Reed left Baltimore and went to, the Jets and the Texans, a guy who's considered one of the greatest safeties of all time, he didn't have it anymore. He wasn't that great with the Jets, and he was not that great with the Texans either. I feel like Ed Reed has entered this territory, and this was the one guy on our list that I said I don't think he makes a team next year, or goes to a team next year.
For me, I was kind of in the same boat. We were talking a little bit about it earlier, and along with everything you said, first thing I want to preface this with is I support 100% fully the Black Lives Matter movement. If you follow me on my personal account, even though, because I know some of my followers on my sports account also follow my personal account, I've been very outspoken about the social injustice and everything going on in our country, and I've even attended protests. So I'm 100% for all of that. That being said, when you're calling out the organization, that being the NFL, for quote, what was it? That they're a part of the system. Basically, that's discriminating against the African American community. And now he's not wrong. I can't sit here and tell him that he's wrong. But you can't expect to get a job working for an organization or company that you're going to talk down about, and then expect for one of the organizations to reach out for you and give you a job. No team is going to want that distraction in their locker room. And I understand what he's saying, and I agree with what he's saying.
I mean, there's
already
teams who have said they're going to allow, like, kneeling and whatnot. Like, they don't really care. Like, I know the Cardinals have said that.
Right.
I know, I'm only biased here because of the Ravens, but the Ravens owner put out a 9-minute video explaining why it was important to let players use their platform and whatnot, and to, stop talking about it and just listen to what they got to say.
Right.
And then make a decision from there. And I was, like, super happy that my owner came out and said that, because I don't remember if other owners did that. I know Kyle Shanahan was a big one that came out and said, hey, I don't care, they can kneel. That's their business, not mine. I think it's time to listen, blah, 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 blah. So it's not like the NFL is, like, shunning people away, but at the same time, right, if you are going to directly criticize the people you work for, why would they want to keep you around? So I get what you're saying there.
Right. And don't get me wrong, I think Eric Reed is a talented player. And again, like, not only along with everything that we're saying in terms of the political comments he's made and his previous, not so successful seasons. In addition to that, like we mentioned with Tony Jefferson, the safety position isn't a super valuable position in the NFL. It's easily filled. You're easily replaced. There's not a big market for safeties in the NFL.
At least not
so
right now,
he's got right, and he's got that working against him as well.
We are not in the age of Brian Dawkins, Ed Reed, Troy Polamalu, etc.
You're not in the age where a formidable safety is needed for a successful defense. Now, having a great safety is awesome because he can play anywhere on the field for the most part.
And he can coach your team and tell you what's going to happen.
Exactly. But Eric Reed and guys like Tony Jefferson, they aren't that guy. They aren't the formidable, can-do-it-all safety. And that's why they're still free agents. Because these are young guys. These guys are only 20. Tony Jefferson and Reed are only 28 years old. They're by no means old. But that just goes to show that the safety position isn't super valuable. So I agree with what you're saying in the fact that I don't believe he's going to be on a roster either, unless an injury were to occur. again, and like when I kind of like with Tony Jefferson, when I'm thinking about it, teams that would potentially need or have been interested in safeties. I put the Cowboys on there because they've been wanting a safety for a while. Now I don't think he's a very good fit, so I don't really see that occurring. I also put the Jets on there just to kind of maybe potentially pair a guy across from Jamal Adams and, maybe let Jamal Adams, explore the field a little bit more and get into different areas and try different packages to have Eric Reed cover different spots of the field so you can use Jamal Adams in different ways. But like you said, I don't really see it happening unless an injury occurs. I don't see him getting signed by a team.
I mean, I'm sure it'll happen, right? But there's just no, place where I see it. Maybe someone like the Raiders. I know they need a lot of secondary help just in general. So if we're going to talk about a team that needs someone, I mean the Raiders could pick them up.
Right.
I mean, I can't even remember the last time I thought the Raiders secondary was good. It's been a long time. Mm. Yeah, when you think secondary, you definitely don't think Raiders. So maybe they would stand to have an upgrade with Eric Reed. All right. Well, we're going to move away from the defense for a second. And we are going to, or are we?
Yeah, we're looking at offensive.
Yeah. Okay. Because I couldn't remember if we had, if I was heading to Clay Matthews or not. Clay Matthews is on here. But next guy we're going to talk about is Kelvin Beachum. He's an offensive tackle. Correct. Okay, so Kelvin Beachum. Oh, he is a guy who was on the New York Jets, if I remember correctly, right?
Yes, he was.
And they released him, if I remember correctly as well.
I don't believe they released him. I believe his contract was just had expired. I could be wrong on that. Because when I was doing some research on him today, because the Jets are actually the team I'm picking him to go back to. I feel like he's going to he's going to reunite with them. Another thing about kind of just going on with the tackles here, what the tackle position is interesting in the fact that you can never have too many good tackles on your football team, if you ask me. So you can even add him for depth. But this is a guy who's 31 years old. And the fact, and like I'm saying, tackle is an extremely valuable position. All teams can look to upgrade their tackle positions, whether it be their starter or additional tackle depth. That being said, this guy's 31 years old, and the fact that we're so late into the offseason, he hasn't been added as depth or to be someone's starter is a bit worrisome. That's another reason why I think he might be he might reunite with the Jets is if no other teams are really interested. This guy was a captain for the Jets. Let's keep that in mind. So he was obviously had some kind of role in the locker room. The players amongst him obviously really liked him. To me, that just signifies that, he was a good guy in the locker room. I feel like that's probably his best fit. And I feel like a guy who's 31 years old, plays a very valuable position, hasn't been signed by another team yet. I could see him just reuniting with the team already on.
Yeah, that sounds about right to me. I actually had him going to the Jets as well, so I guess we agree on this one. Mostly because it seemed like the Jets cut him to not have the $11 million in cap space that he was going to have this year. That's kind of what it seemed like to me.
That would make sense. Because you don't just cut team captain,
Yeah, I know what you're saying. So it makes a lot of sense if he decides to go back to a place that I feel like has probably treated him well. Maybe you don't like Adam Gase, maybe you don't like Sam Darnold, who knows? I can't, it's a hard read, I feel, for him.
I agree.
Yeah, maybe.
That's pretty much all I got on him. His is pretty simple. I mean, again, like if you're a tackle at this point and who's one a tackle that's not particularly super old either, because we've seen tackles play to 35, 36, 37, 38 years old, and you're 31 years old and you haven't been signed yet. It typically means you're probably not drawing a whole lot of interest from other teams.
Yeah.
Well,
Alrighty.
I'm ready to move on to the next
Yeah,
one.
Clay Matthews. So Clay Matthews last year, actually had a somewhat productive season until he tailored off with the Rams. This was a guy who, was a legend in Green Bay. Everybody loved him. They loved talking about him. And then he got hurt last year. He played 13 games, and he had 8 sacks in 13 games, which isn't bad. I'd take that kind of production from a veteran. But, he did get hurt, and he's definitely not the monster that he used to be, right? When he was producing 10, 13 sack seasons, things like that. He did kind of revitalize his career from his last year in Green Bay, because his last year in Green Bay, I believe it was 3.5 sacks, maybe it was 4.5. I'm pretty sure it was 3.5. And then last year he upgrades to 8. So maybe he benefited from the scheme sort of thing. Maybe he benefited from, going to a new team. Who really knows? But either way, he hasn't been signed yet. But I think he hasn't been signed maybe either because he's waiting to see how Clowney's thing turns out, right? Because if Clowney gets a ton of money, he had 8 sacks last year. He'd easily argue for, a good chunk of money, right? He's only 33. Right. He's only 33, which sounds old for a pass rusher, but if he's still producing at 33, then you could easily be like Terrell Suggs, right? Terrell Suggs milked some money out of the Ravens in his last couple of years. I don't see why Clay Matthews wouldn't try to do something like that. But when I look at where he could go, I feel like at this point he would probably have to take a cheaper veteran deal. And if you wanted to play for, say, a contender, which I feel like is where he'd be at this point in his career, right? You want to play for a contender.
Right.
I feel like a place like San Francisco, Baltimore, or even Pittsburgh wouldn't be a bad idea.
That's exactly.
I think all three. Sorry, I was gonna finish my thought first.
Yeah.
I think all three of those teams are teams with solid defensive lines, and Clay Matthews would only add depth and production to those 3 lines.
Agreed. I actually picked the Steelers as well because going along with what you're saying, he's probably going to be a veteran minimum kind of guy. He's not going to get a super huge deal by any means. He's getting up there in age. Yeah, only 33. But, he's probably got a couple good years left in him. I mean good, probably like, 4 to 5, upwards to 8 sacks a season kind of years left in him. But as a rotational piece and a really good defensive line, kind of like what you're saying with the Ravens or the 49ers or even Steelers, the reason why I picked the Steelers is I believe pairing him across from a guy like TJ Watt would be not only extremely beneficial for Watt, but mostly beneficial for him because Watt's going to get the majority of the double team and the picks and the attention in terms of defensive line. So if you have a veteran like Clay Matthews along the other side, creating havoc in the backfield and getting pressure on the quarterback without a lot of resistance coming his way, I feel like that's a pretty good deal, and that would bode pretty well for the Steelers. That's already very familiar.
One other team I think he could probably go to as well is probably Tennessee, if you wanted to replace Jarrell Casey.
Yeah, I can see that.
So that would be another team I'd see. Either way, I think there's options for him. He might be waiting for, the right time. And like I said, who knows, at this point, after maybe not being immediately signed in free agency, it's quite possible that he's waiting on some health reports or seeing where Clowney goes at this point.
Right. And I feel like with any free agent right now, they're probably all really taking their time. Because they don't want to put themselves in a bad situation, or they want to make sure because a lot of these guys do want to just go to contenders at this point because Some of them are older. The majority of them are older. They're in their mid to upper 30s, and they just want to potentially get one last shot at a ring before they retire. So they are going to take their time and not just sign with.
I do have to say, if they were to go to, if Matthews were to go to the Steelers, they have some of the lowest cap space right now, and you need approximately $2 to $3 million going into a season. So he'd have to be okay with accepting like a $3 million 1-year deal or whatever, or something like that. He'd have to be okay with that. And Clay Matthews has made plenty of money in his career. He might be one of those veterans where he would say, "Fuck the money, just put me on a contending team and let me win a Super Bowl." Because some veterans are like that. They'll take a discounted rate simply for the fact that they just want a ring on their hand, and they can say they did it and move on with their life. And for a guy like Clay Matthews, I don't know if he's Hall of Fame worthy. I mean, you could debate that. I mean, he's had 5+ seasons, I believe. Maybe it's 4. It's 4 or 5+ seasons where he's had, more than 10 sacks. He was certainly a guy who had the attention of the NFL for a long time. He's had one of those linebackers who actually has had multiple interceptions. He's even had a couple of those turnovers go for touchdowns. So a Super Bowl would only strengthen your resume, right? At least that's what I think. You still there?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, for the most part, that's all I really got on Clay Matthews.
Okay, gotcha. Well, speaking of a guy who's, older, and like you said, most of these guys are older, but this guy is pretty old, actually. He's like 38, if I remember correctly, is Jason Peters. Jason Peters is probably one of the better tackles, I shouldn't say tackle, I should just say offensive lineman. But he's been one of the better offensive linemen that we have seen pretty much this entire last decade. I would say Jason Peters is up there with Marshall Yanda and Joe Thomas for the 2010 decade, I would say. I mean, that sounds about right, doesn't it?
I would agree with you there. If you're 38 years old still playing in the league, especially as a tackle, you're doing something right.
So, he's legendary. I don't think we need to spend time on like what he's done because he's been amazing.
I think this situation is a bit interesting though, because I believe it was yesterday the news broke that Brandon Brooks, the guard for the
Eagles,
Achilles, and he's out for the season. And now, yes, Jason Peters plays tackle, but as a guy who's 38 years old, can he really bounce and keep up with the elite pass rushers that are in this league now? And he is a former Eagle. Could there potentially be a reunion, and could they move him inside to guard to fill Brandon Brooks' spot? That was my pick. Because even prior to the injury to Brandon Brooks, yesterday there was rumors going on that there might be a reunion between Jason Peters and the Eagles just because they needed to add some depth and some experience to their offensive line. And now when you got a big injury to one of your better offensive linemen in Brandon Brooks, that's going to keep him out for the entire season, I can only imagine that the interest between Jason Peters and the Eagles has only skyrocketed in the past 24 hours. What are your thoughts?
I think my problem is, and you kind of already stated it, but I think my problem is I don't think he would play guard. I forget what his last name is. It was Andre, though. The Eagles traded up for a tackle, right? So obviously if you're trading up for a tackle, you didn't intend to go back to Jason Peters in the first place.
Right.
And if you trade up to draft a guy, are you just going to automatically tell him, hey, you're playing guard here because you're the rookie and we're going to take this like hometown hero and Jason Peters and put him back? I don't think you're going to do that. This is also a guy who's missed, 23 of his last 50-plus games. I don't see him going back to Philadelphia. It makes a lot of sense. I just don't see it happening. If you ask me, I think he's a guy who would go to a place like Denver, San Diego. That seems about right to me.
That need
What?
off
What'd you say?
teams that specifically need offensive linemen as well. I could agree with you there.
And and that's just if he wants to play football. I think he's at a point in his career where he got a Super Bowl, so he doesn't need to go win, right? I mean, he could chase the second ring if he really wanted to, but you're a guy who already, got a ring, and if you're not retiring at this point, it's probably because you still love football, and you're playing it because you enjoy the game, right? And if you're playing it to enjoy the game, and you're not necessarily, I shouldn't say this, don't take this lightly, every player wants to win the Super Bowl. All 32 teams want to win the Super Bowl. The Dolphins were throwing away their season, but the players in that locker room still wanted to win the Super Bowl, even if it wasn't very realistic, right? And if you listen to, Pat McAfee and AJ Hawk, they talked about how when you're on a losing team, you usually know it within the first 4 games, and there are some guys who will just give up on the season and they'll play for a paycheck. Or they'll play because they still love the game and they know better years are ahead. For a guy like Jason Peters, I think you pick a team who has potential. Like, for example, the Chargers are a very talented roster. I don't know what's going to happen to them, quarterback-wise, and they're in a tough division with the Chiefs and the Broncos. But regardless, you could go to a talented team like the Chargers, who are only 1 year away from being 12-4, right? You could go to the Broncos, a team who's trending and actually has quite a bit of veterans on it, and I think that would be a nice presence for Drew Lock. And tackles have always talked about how they love blocking for the run game. Well, congratulations, you got Philip Lindsay and Melvin Gordon there, so I bet you they're going to be running the ball plenty. I don't see a situation where he doesn't play for a team this year, and I feel like he'd be headed to the AFC West, but maybe not.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I mean, because I'm kind of like living in the the storybook land in terms of the Eagles and potentially moving him to guard. And maybe and the only reason I think that is because typically I would say, especially a veteran wouldn't want to change positions, especially to go from tackle to the interior of the guard position. But I just think given the situation and then a chance to go play for the team that you played for years previous, and being in the latter half of your career, maybe you're not necessarily playing for a championship. Maybe you're not, you know what I'm saying. You're not playing for a championship. You just want to go play football. Why not go play football for the team that you played for so much?
Yeah.
But anyway, that's all I got.
Yeah. No, I totally get what you're saying. I think the story fits really well. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me based upon, how the Eagles have approached the offseason, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that doesn't.
So that's kind of how I viewed it. Either way, he's a guy that is 100%. Unless he announces retirement, obviously, I think he's 100% going to be on a team.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Logan Ryan. And after this, we'll probably be getting to some way bigger names than what we're doing. Not that the previous ones haven't been big names, but these are probably the hot ones that ESPN is still debating, NFL Network is probably still debating and whatnot. But right. Logan Ryan. Let's talk about Logan Ryan.
Yeah, for me, this is the guy that I'm still shocked is on the open market.
That's what I was about to say. I'm surprised he hasn't been signed.
He had a really, really good year last year, and he's been solid throughout his career. And with the position being defensive back, probably arguably the most difficult position to play outside quarterback in the National Football League. I just don't understand how he's not on a team. He's only 29 years old. Maybe the price tag is what's holding other teams back from signing him, because I was looking into it, and the rumor was he was asking for about $10 million. Excuse me, for about $10 million. But I mean, for a defensive back of his caliber, being 29 years old, maybe that's a little bit steep. But I feel like that's just about on par, given the difficulty with the position. the need of at least multiple guys who are capable at that position. To me, it just doesn't make sense that he's still in the open market. He was a guy that the Cardinals, I wanted them to go after, even though we're pretty good at defensive back. We're pretty set at defensive back. Adding a guy like that to the depth, because for me, I don't feel like you can have enough good defensive backs on your team. I feel like it's an extremely valuable position, especially when one or two guys go down. That really wrecks your secondary, and it showed for the Cardinals last year.
So, I'm sorry, keep going.
Yeah, what are your thoughts? No, that was about it. What are your thoughts?
So, pretty much what you said. I'm shocked he hasn't been signed yet. Remember, this was the guy who made the pick six against Tom Brady. He's the last guy who caught a Tom Brady pass as a Patriot. Fun fact, if you didn't know that, former Patriot is the last guy to catch another former Patriots throw, but he was not on the same team when it happened. It's weird to me that he came out and said the Titans didn't really attempt to re-sign him. Maybe the Titans just didn't want him around anymore. I don't know if...
I feel like that also attributes to because maybe he was asking for a bit of a steeper price tag, and then they were also re-signing Ryan Tannehill, and then they're also dealing with what they want to do with Derrick Henry going forward. So I kind of see where they're coming from there. But continue. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
It was interesting to me though, because like Mike, I didn't think Mike Vrabel would let someone like him go, right?
Right.
It just didn't like make a ton of sense to me. Their calorie sap space is what I was going to say. Their salary cap space is almost $20 million. It's 19.3. So I don't understand why they can't sign him. I think it's weird that they're not, but maybe they're looking towards the future with Derrick Henry. Who knows? Either way,
right.
He's not going to the Titans. That's what it sounds like. I still think he should just go back to the Titans. That seems like the best fit, but apparently the Titans don't want him. And if I have to pick another team that's not Tennessee, it's two teams we've actually already mentioned. It's Philadelphia and the Raiders, to me. Again, the Raiders always need secondary help. I think Logan Ryan would be a great fit for them. And what better way to, boost your secondary than add a guy who's, won 2 Super Bowls? Clearly still has it. I mean, he had the pick 6, in the playoff game, right? And I think it'd be a good fit. The only problem for the Raiders is they have only about $9 million in cap space. So if he's not going to sign for less than $10 million, then the Raiders are not an option. The other team that is an option because they do have the salary cap space, I think, would be the Eagles. You already have Darius Slay. Why not add Logan Ryan? If it's a year that you think you can win the Super Bowl, right, again with Carson Wentz, why not do it? That's what I think. Why not go for it? I think you shoot for the moon here. And here's the thing: if you sign him to, he says he's not going to sign for less than $10 million. Let's say you sign a $10 million deal to a $10 million deal, and that takes up $10 million in cap space. You got $14 million left for the year. It makes a lot of sense to me for him to go to Philadelphia, especially when you lost part of your secondary at Malcolm Jenkins.
Yes, exactly. That's what I was going to bring up because I also picked the Eagles. I feel like pairing a guy like Logan Ryan across from arguably he probably a top 5 corner in the league. Could we agree on that? In Darius Slay, at least top 10 for sure.
Yeah.
Pairing him with Logan Ryan, I feel like that is great for a defense. Like I just mentioned before, I don't think you can have enough really good defensive backs. And then my main point in that I was going to bring up was because of the loss of Malcolm Jenkins. Adding another veteran presence, a guy who, like you said, has won multiple Super Bowls, has started on multiple teams, has been consistent throughout his career, and then putting him across from Darius Slay, and just to add that veteran presence back, I feel like that'd be really great for their defense.
Yeah, I totally agree. There was another team that I was thinking he could go to as well, if you're okay with moving on, actually.
Yeah, I'm just about good, yeah.
And hear me out on this one here. I think he should actually rejoin his old quarterback and go to Tampa Bay.
Yeah, I could see that, especially because when you look at the Bucks roster defensively, there's not a lot of big names, and their secondary is definitely lacking
So,
leadership.
so there's one massive problem, okay? So they have a big defensive line, right? Like they have a Dominican Sue, Shaquille Barrett, things like that. And if those players work out like they're supposed to, they're fine on the defensive line. It is the secondary that's a problem.
Right.
Last time I looked, they only have about 6-7 million in cap space. So he would have to want a ring over money. Now he already has 2 rings, and he might not be worried about that. So if he's not
Exactly.
worried,
I feel like
so,
at the age 29, you're about to hit that 30 point, and that's kind of where defensive backs, they're kind of like running backs. Once they hit that age 30, they kind of either keep going for a couple more years or they really, really fall off.
yeah,
I feel like he's
we saw
probably
it with
got a couple
Darrelle
decent
Revis.
years left in him. So he's probably going to want to get at least one more big payday before he
Yeah,
calls it quits.
yeah. So I guess it depends on whether he wants to chase the third ring or not. I don't know what I would do if I was in this position. Like I already have 2 rings. Like do I need a third win, especially if I haven't had, a Hall of Fame type career? Like at this point, do I go for a third ring or do I go for money? And the answer
Right.
might be money, which is why he's been sticking with what he's saying, right? I guess you could also argue that he could also go to Indianapolis, but they already signed Xavier Rhodes. And I did find out what Xavier Rhodes was from the previous episode. It's 1.5 million. They're paying him nothing.
He's not missing anything.
Yeah, yeah, they're signing him to a nothing prove it deal. So, yeah, I guess Indianapolis would make sense to me too. And maybe you even cut Xavier Rhodes if you don't like him, because Xavier Rhodes would not cost you much.
Yeah, he wouldn't cost him.
Either way, Logan Ryan will be on a team.
Oh, yeah.
This is just the one guy, not the one guy, one of 2, I should say, on our list that I'm just shocked that he hasn't been signed yet. So,
I agree. And I think the other one that is shocking you that's not on the team yet is the guy we're about to talk about next.
actually, for me, it was the last guy on our list, but I guess Everson Griffin, probably it's a little surprising that he hasn't been signed either. So, let's talk about Everson Griffin for a second. He was booted out by the Vikings. He claimed that he was not going to play for them anymore, right? And the most recent team that actually said they were interested in him, which I thought was interesting, is the Cardinals. But I'm not sure they could pay for him if they wanted to. Could they?
Exactly. And because that was the team I was going to bring that up, is there were rumors going around that the Cardinals were interested. And I'm sure they can make the space to pay him. And I feel like a 32-year-old defensive end, you could probably find a way to sneak that around the cap. And they could probably find a way to pay him. Now, it is going to make it tight. But I felt like that would have been a great addition for this defense, because yes, the Cardinals did address the edge position in signing Devon Kennard, who is was an outside linebacker and or defensive end for the Lions this last year. He got about 7 sacks. He's not a big name. He's not a world beater by any means. He's not a top 5, top 10 guy, but he's a solid outside linebacker, and that's what he's going to be with this Cardinals defense. Now, if you were to bring in a guy like Everson Griffin, he would be a rotational and or backup piece. And putting Everson Griffin across from Chandler Jones, that would be a really dirty pass rush combo. And then, because you still got Hassan Reddick on that team as well. And personally, I think, especially if they were to add somebody else, like even like a Marcus Golden by chance, potentially bring back Marcus Golden, because that was a guy who got 10 sacks last year, and he's still a free agent, and he wouldn't be making much of anything at all, and would be making less than Everson Griffin. So I wouldn't be shocked if the Cardinals are still looking to address the edge position. It's probably, I can imagine it's probably not going to be Everson Griffin just because of the price tag. And it's already been shot down by local reporters. So I don't really see it happening, but I felt like that would have been my best fit. Outside of that, I picked the Cowboys because I also feel like they could use some more beefing up. As I stated previously in this episode, They could use some more beefing up along the front seven and defensive line. And I think pairing a guy like Everson Griffin across from Jalen Smith would be really great for that defense. What are your thoughts?
I don't disagree with you on that take, but actually where I got him going is I have him headed to Cleveland or Seattle, personally.
Yeah, I can see Seattle because they still need to address that position as well. And they still do want Jadeveon Clowney back. It's just outside their price tag. Now,
And
Everson
a guy who
Griffin,
would fit their price tag is Everson Griffin.
Everson Griffin. Yeah. I actually like that. I actually didn't think of that. I like that pick.
The reason I actually have Cleveland is I looked into their line, right, because we know they're supposed to have a monstrous line. I looked into Olivier Vernon, and I realized how much of a name he is, and not so much production, because he didn't have a lot of production. He's supposed to be getting paid $15.5 million this coming year, right? At $15.5 million, you are at minimum expected to get 8 sacks, and he got 2.5 or 3.5. It's one of those two last year. Here's the thing, and this is the fun thing about guaranteed money, right? So the reason why so many teams will have dead money when they trade a player away, like for example, the Ravens had $16 million in dead money last year, even though they traded away Joe Flacco. Why? Because when it was signed, it was guaranteed that the Ravens would pay it. So unless a team like the team you're trading with, agrees to take on the guaranteed money, even when you trade away a player, you are expected to still pay that player their salary. Now, that player will also get paid by another team. Like, for example, Joe Flacco did get paid by the Broncos, right? But he still got another $16 million from Baltimore. So he got a double payment there.
Right.
The Browns traded for Olivier Vernon from the Giants.
Right.
So if he was cut, they don't owe him a single bit of that $15.5 million. None. So that gives you $15.5 million in cap space. And who can you spend it on if you cut him? Everson Griffin. This is also the case I'll probably make for Jadeveon Clowney. Spoiler alert, the most obvious free agent, is going to be on our list. But, I thought about, okay, if Clowney doesn't work out because Clowney doesn't want to join the Browns, I thought Everson Griffin would be a great example if Everson Griffin wants more money. That they can easily clear it. You get rid of Vernon, put in Griffin, you have Griffin opposite side of Garrett. I think it's a great combination.
All right. Were you ready to move on to the next one?
Yeah. All right. So the next one, this is probably where we go into like the more obvious ones. This guy is just demanding too much money. That's why he hasn't been signed. It's Devonta Freeman. It wasn't crazy to me that he is still on the market because every time I see him in the news, he's just demanding way too much money. And even the last team that looked into him, which was the Buccaneers, which I thought was the perfect place for him to go. I was like, yeah, go to a division rival, right? And then beat your division rival and tell them to kiss your ass. That's like the perfect way to do it. A lot of players like to do that. However, Freeman priced himself out of Tampa Bay, which I think is ridiculous. I feel like if you're a guy who wants to win a ring, why not win a ring with the guy who crushed your heart 5 years ago?
And I was thinking about this too, and I still feel like Tampa Bay is the perfect fit. Like we were talking about earlier, tight end. When you ask me, tight end, safety, and running back is the least valuable positions in the National Football League.
Tight end. I don't know about tight end.
Easily replaceable.
I don't know about tight end.
Okay, maybe not tight end, but it's still in a relatively easy position. Because, okay, let me rephrase. A relatively easy position to replace. Because obviously there's an upper echelon when it comes to tight ends. And there's the best of best and then like a pile of shit and then everybody else. And that's what I mean in terms of that. Not necessarily that it's not a super valuable position, but easily replaceable, and teams can get by without having an elite. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Now,
if we were to go to at least the position that is least like seeked out, I would 100% argue fullback or punt holder.
Yeah, long snapper. Yeah.
Yeah. Long snapper. My bad. I'm an idiot. Yeah, long snapper.
No, I agree with what you're saying. But anyway, with Devontae Freeman's situation, he is asking for too much money. He is the least valuable position in the National Football League. You're easily replaced. Teams are learning to not pay massive contracts to running backs anymore. One of them being the coach of the team you were just trying to get a contract from, that being the Buccaneers, and Bruce Arians. Now, I just feel like that's his best fit, though, because I feel like Bruce Arians would utilize Devontae Freeman very well to meet his strength because he's a very good running back at catching passes out of the backfield as well. And we know that's what he did with David Johnson a lot in the couple years that David Johnson had his really good success. And now I feel like he would be a good fit for Devontae Freeman. He's just got to get that price tag down, and I feel like that's where he's going to end up. Because right now for the Buccaneers, that lead back in that room is Ronald Jones. You really want that to be your starting running back? I don't.
I don't either.
So,
I think the big thing is that Freeman's being stubborn about it, and he's kind of taking after Le'Veon Bell, who held out. The problem is Le'Veon Bell, I think, actually, he still got what he wanted out of it. It was a little bit less money than what he was demanding, a little bit less. But Le'Veon Bell still got a big payday, was still a core piece for the Jets, and still had a pretty good season.
Mm-hmm.
Freeman is not Bell. I was trying to find a way to put it lightly, but there's no other way I can say it. Freeman is not Bell. If you ask me, if I am forced to pick between Devontae Freeman and Le'Veon Bell as my running back, who am I picking? The answer is Le'Veon Bell, no question. I'm not taking the argument for Freeman. Freeman's good, but he's also been injured. There's a reason why they signed, oh my God, I can't even remember the other Falcons running back right now. They signed Todd Gurley, but that's not who I was thinking about. You know who I'm talking about, right?
I know, but I can't put a name on it right now, but yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, yeah, they did sign Todd Gurley, but I was thinking of the other guy who was next to Todd Gurley. So, he's pricing himself out of the NFL, not just one team, but the NFL. Mm-hmm. Like, he rejected a $4 million offer from Seattle. Bruce Arians has already come out and said he's too expensive, we can't pay for him, and I don't blame him. But I think if you're Devontae Freeman, you're a guy who already got a paycheck, right? You already got a paycheck.
Right.
You've been in the league for a while. I think you've been in the league for 5 years. I don't see why you can't just go and play for a contender at a more discounted rate. But that's just
right. Me. And especially coming off of injuries as well, because like I was saying earlier, kind of like that 30 plateau for defensive backs and running backs. But now we're even starting to see that younger running backs are starting to trail off a lot quicker. David Johnson, he's 28. You saw what he was the last 2 years. Todd Gurley is only 25. Can you believe that?
Yeah.
And everybody's thinking he's on the back end of his career. And he's 25 years old. Devontae Freeman's 28.
Arthritis is part of that. Let's be fair to Todd Gurley. There is a part of his body that he cannot control.
Right, but that's still part of it. The reason his knee is like that is from playing football all of his life.
Yeah.
So
I don't know where Freeman goes. I didn't actually have an answer. My answer was kind of leaning towards he prices himself out of this year, especially because he said he will hold out. And I just don't see a team paying him what he views as his quote-unquote worth. Like, he signed to become the highest-paid running back, I think it was 3 years ago, right? And so he got his front-loaded money, which is fine. But I don't know. I feel like he already got paid. I feel like at this point in your career as a running back, you should be more like Austin Eckler or Mark Ingram, recognize where you are at, your position, and sign for a lower contract with a contender. Like, Mark Ingram made one of the best decisions ever. He signed for $5 million a year for 3 years and said, yeah, I'm going to play for a team that wants to run first.
Mm-hmm. See, and for me in this situation...
Austin Eckler did the same thing, right? They were a team who was coming off a 12-4 season, and no, they didn't have that much success this last coming year. But Austin Eckler was like, yeah, I'm going to sign for less money because I know we need money for other players. And I can't do it all by myself.
See, for me in this situation, I don't think Devontae Freeman can afford to sit out.
Why not?
Le'Veon Bell got away with it because he was the best running back in the NFL and someone was going to pick him up. Devontae Freeman never has been the best running back in the NFL. Le'Veon Bell is also younger. Devontae Freeman is heading towards the back half of his career, even at 28 years old. If you sit out a year, coming off an injury year, and you're a running back asking for a big load of money, nobody's going to pay you that. And if you're sitting out, you're only hurting yourself and getting a contract. To me, if you ask me, I feel like potentially he's bluffing to try and get a team to come and grab him. But I feel like a team's going to call his bluff because running back isn't that valuable, first of all. But I feel like as football's starting to come back around, training camp is starting to come back around, if he's still not on a roster, he's going to temper his expectations on a contract. And I feel like Bruce Arians is still that interested that he'll end up being a buck and being behind Tom Brady as running back.
So, I know they just drafted a running back and they have Kerryon Johnson, but what about the Lions? They have $30 million in cap space.
Yeah, but with the fact that they just drafted, I believe his first name is DeAndre Swift.
Yep.
I think it's DeAndre Swift, and then having still Kerryon Johnson still, I feel like there's no way that they would put them because Devontae Freeman still is going to demand some money. I feel like there's no way that the Lions would put that much money and that much capital into the running back position. I mean, it's the Lions. We've seen them do weirder things, and they do have the cap space, but is that what they want to dedicate it to?
I guess Miami is another
So personally, Miami would be another one.
They need a running back. I mean, they have Jordan Howard, but I feel like they need more than just Jordan Howard.
I would agree with that. I feel like in any offense now, you need two capable running backs.
I don't know.
But I mean, that's about all I got on Devontae Freeman.
I don't know. It's hard. I think he's just priced himself out. Like, those are a couple teams he could go to, but it just seems weird when he's priced himself out of places. Alrighty.
All right. Ready for the big two?
The final two here, which may or may not take up more conversation than we are thinking. Jadeveon Clowney. The simple matter of the fact is he's a guy who is demanding 12 sack a year money, and he has
he's never had more than 10,
and he has not provided that.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, this is a guy who has never had more than 9.5 sacks in a season, and he's asking for top 3 money. He was originally asking for $20 million a year, which would put him in the top 3 among edge defenders.
I'm not giving it to him.
Don't get me wrong. Clowney is a good edge defender.
He's very good.
Correct. He's a very good disruptor, but he is not a pure pass rusher. And I'm kind of the fact that maybe the sack stat is a little bit overrated, just a little bit. And disruption is a bit more important.
Hold on. Remember that the sack stat is overrated when Pardue starts to argue on Twitter that Chandler Jones is one of the best.
Okay, but he also leads the leagues in strips and also fumble recoveries amongst edge defenders and also tackles for a loss.
This wasn't meant to get you on a rant for Chandler Jones. This was just to roast you. Please move on about Clowney.
But there's more stats to back it up. Anyway, that's the thing with Clowney is he is extremely disruptive, but he doesn't quite have the stats to put him in the upper echelon of edge defenders. He's very good, yes. Top 10? Probably. So he deserves top 10 money, and top 10 money is probably around $10, $12 million. Now, the lowest I've heard he's willing to go is 15. And teams have offered him that, but he hasn't taken it yet. So I assume he's still willing to take his time. But soon, it's going to be the last portion of free agency.
If you want to know what it would be, it would be $16.8 million, which is where Matt Judon is at right now.
Mm-hmm.
Za'Darius Smith is
And
at 16.5, and so is Chandler Jones. And I will
mhm.
take Matt Judon, Za'Darius Smith, and Chandler Jones over Clowney. So the 16 million area sounds about right for him.
And Clowney only had 3.5 sacks last year, and then you're expecting to come in and be the highest paid edge defender in the NFL? You're crazy.
You'd be paid more than
There's
Trey
absolutely no
Flowers,
way.
Von Miller,
Mhm.
Cameron Jordan, D Ford. No. 100%
There's
no.
there's absolutely no way. There's guys that are more disruptive than you, that have 3 times the amount of production as you, and you want to be paid $3-4 million more than them. There's absolutely no way. He's completely pricing himself out. He's overvaluing himself. And don't get me wrong, players from their side, they owe it to themselves to do that, because this is the money that they're going to need to last for the rest of their lives and use for their family going forward. So I understand where he's coming from, but like, you also got to be realistic if you actually want to play on a football team.
I totally agree with you. If we're talking about where Clowney should go, I'm sticking with the Cleveland thing that I was talking about before. I mean, him going back to Seattle makes sense, but I really do think he could go to Cleveland.
That was that was the team I picked too.
Do the Olivier Vernon thing that I talked about, and I think Clowney across from Garrett would be monstrous. We already know Garrett's going to produce, right? So if you have a guy who is maybe doesn't rack up sacks but is disruptive on the other side, and Garrett's taking care of business on the opposite, hey, you've got a mean defense going on for the Browns there, which totally matches up with the attitude that the AFC North has. Because when you think about it, I mean, excluding the Bengals, but Baltimore's defense, Pittsburgh's defense, they run the mill, right? And if Cleveland comes out and says, hey, we got a defense who wants to run the mill too, hey, that's what you got to do, right? And I think it would perfectly fit the division for Cleveland to step it up and say, hey, we got a monstrous pass rush. You better be able to deal with it. It'll help to get, a statue like Big Ben and possibly try and limit Lamar Jackson. I really don't know how that would work out. But if you can take out, one of, your opponents when it comes to the division, then hey, you're certainly looking for a wild card, maybe even the division itself. Now that's, speaking ahead, and Mayfield needs to actually produce at quarterback and whatnot for everything. But like, strictly speaking, defense, if you can match with your top two in your division, I think that's a solid way to go about it. The other team that I thought definitely could stand to work with Clowney would be the Titans, and they have the cap space for it too. Again, just replacing Jarrell Casey here.
Right. And the Browns were the team I picked too, because number one, they have the money. And then, like you said, putting him across from Myles Garrett and the other pieces on that defensive line would make it monstrous. I feel like Jadeveon Clowney and Myles Garrett complement each other very well too. Obviously, Myles Garrett's he's the guy who's also going to put up the numbers. He's not only a big disruptor, but he also uses his disruption to rack up the numbers more. So if you have a guy across from him, like a Jadeveon Clowney, who's a massive disruptor, it doesn't quite always get the numbers, but has the ability to. I feel like if you have two guys like that, it's going to open things up more for Jadeveon Clowney, and it's only going to open up things more for Myles Garrett as well. And like you said, it would be a great way to combat Lamar Jackson. Obviously, you still got to have the presence there in the middle, because Jackson can just run it straight up the middle there if you bring guys off the edge. But I feel like that would be the best case scenario for Jadeveon. I feel like that would be a best fit for the.
Yeah, I would agree with that. There was one other team that I heavily considered at first, but then went back on it because they don't have the cap space for him. If they did, I think Minnesota would be the perfect place for him to go to.
Mm-hmm. Also to replace Everson Griffin, so yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Do you think he takes something less than what he's asking, or does he hold out?
Now, in terms of what he's asking, do you mean his new number around 15 million?
Do you think he will actually sign for 15?
I feel like yes, he will. I don't think it's a good idea for any player to hold out in free agency and just waste a year of their career. in the end, like we saw it with Le'Veon Bell, and maybe it's different because he's an edge, which is a more valuable position than running back. But Le'Veon Bell still got less overall money by holding out. Maybe he got what he wanted overall, but he still got less overall money. But I just feel like that's not ever a good situation for a player. I don't think a player should ever resort to just wasting a year of your career. So I feel like eventually at some point someone's going to give him a deal that he's just probably going to take. And it'll probably just be a 1 year deal, like a 1 year, $13 to $15 million deal. And then he'll try and rack up as many numbers as he can and then just try and use that to go forward and, get that big extended and bigger deal the following offseason. I think another thing with Jadeveon Clowney's being on the Seahawks this last year kind of hurt his chances of getting a big deal this last year because they're outside of Bobby Wagner, there weren't very many really great defensive pieces along with Jadeveon Clowney, and obviously, you need to be able to rise above.
Are you talking about on the line or in the secondary? Because I can name quite a few in the secondary.
Well, there's some players there in the secondary, but in the vast overall, that Seattle defense wasn't good last year. It was below average. They had some players, and you got guys like Bobby Wagner and everything, but you also got.
I would say Bruce Irvin and KJ Wright are definitely people worth talking about.
See, I've never been big on Bruce Irvin, and KJ Wright is there, but he's also hit and miss. I've been watching a lot of Seahawks football over the last couple of years, and those have never been guys that really scared me as a Cardinal fan personally. Overall, I see what you're saying. They're good players, but they're not guys that are going to raise the level of a defense. Anyway, that's just about all I got on Clowney. I think he'll sign a deal, a 1 year, $12 to $15 million deal, because I just don't think sitting out is good for an NFL player, and I think he knows that.
I think he knows that too. All right, let's go to the last one, the one that's probably going to take up more than just the 8 minutes we've been giving each player. Cam Newton, the most obvious one besides Clowney on here. I understand why Newton hasn't been signed. We talked about this not on the show, but individually together, that this coming year, it was going to be really hard for veteran quarterbacks to find a place. It took a while for Andy Dalton. It's taken a while for Newton. He still hasn't. Eli Manning said he was only going to play if he got a starting position, but it was very clear he was not going to start no matter where he went. Right? And then players like Joe Flacco have come out and said, yeah, I'll take a backup role because he knows he has to. Because that's the state of the field of where we were at. The Bucs replaced their, quarterback with Tom Brady. There was, and you look at the field of the other teams who needed to replace their quarterback, right? The Bengals, the Chargers, etc., and you realize that they weren't going to sign Joe Flacco, Eli Manning, Cam Newton, Andy Dalton as their starter. They were looking to draft. You got Justin Herbert. You got Joe Burrow. You got Tua in Miami. And even then, Ryan Fitzpatrick is still there. I think a lot of what has happened for Newton, throw the attitude that he has had for a second for the side. I have been heavily critical of Newton since the Super Bowl. I heavily supported Newton all the way till he had that really baby back bitch interview where he just left in the middle being questioned. Sorry, dude, you were 17-1. You couldn't take a fucking loss in the Super Bowl. I understand it's the biggest game, but I've never seen someone, handle it with such disgrace like Newton did. Every other player I've seen, they look upset, extremely upset. They look like they want to cry, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I get that. But if you're going to handle it with disgrace, I think that's a shame. You should not be one of the faces of the NFL. So I've criticized him a lot ever since, but he does a lot of community work. He's actually very nice to the fans, right? He's just a guy who has been in negative light when it comes to the camera. Mm-hmm. So throw the attitude to the side for the second, because I don't think that should count against him. I think he's a guy who would provide a lot to your locker room and a lot to your fan base, and that's what's most important.
Right.
Throw that to the side. Throw that to the side, and I think the unfortunate circumstance of him being injured the last few years, and with COVID and not a lot of teams looking for quarterbacks, it just seemed like he was destined to not get a starting position unless it's in New England, and New England has not signed him.
Yeah, for me, I felt like at the beginning of the offseason, his best chance to tag on somewhere and immediately become the starter was the Bears. And we saw how that turned out. They traded for Nick Foles for whatever dumbass reason.
Yeah, we talked about that a couple episodes ago. Makes no sense. You and I both agreed. If you have to pick between Nick Foles, Cam Newton, and Andy Dalton. I mean, I actually picked Andy Dalton for Chicago, I remember, because I think that fits Matt Nagy's system better. But if you're going to force me to pick between Foles and Newton, I'm picking Newton. I want Newton.
Right. You're taking the former MVP, league MVP. And yeah, you could say Foles, oh, he's got a Super Bowl MVP, but what has he really done in this league long term?
Not much.
This is a guy who's had long-term success in the NFL, serious success in the NFL, has been to a Super Bowl. The only thing with Cam Newton at this point is what I want to know is he truly healthy? Because, again, we haven't seen him play healthy and consistent in over 2 years. So I want to know how much he has left in the tank. And we won't know until we actually see him on the field. And that's the thing is we don't know when or if we're going to see him on the field anytime soon. So as far as we know, he's still banged up. He's not the same because that's what we saw from him the last time because he was still hurting from a prior injury a year prior and then came out to start the season this last year, played terribly, was obviously still hurt, and then got put on injured reserve. So as far as we know, from outside perspectives, he's still banged up. He's not the same guy. And then another thing is, what's his price tag? Because obviously Cam Newton, even if he's willing to accept a backup role, I'm not 100% sure he's willing to accept true backup money. Again, like I just said, this guy is a former league MVP. And while he might be willing to accept backup money, or a backup role, that's going to be in mind of this is eventually, at some point, going to become my job. And that's why prior to us starting the episode, you mentioning him going to the Cardinals, this doesn't make sense to me because, number one, I don't think the Cardinals can afford it. You also mentioned that, but I also don't think he wants to sign with a team where he knows he has zero chance of becoming the starter. That's why, for me, he's at this point, at this spot in the offseason, his best bet is the Patriots because we don't know what Jarrett Stidham is. And the backup quarterback for that team is Brian Hoyer. And he's been a career backup and not a very good one. But to me, Bill Belichick, that's not a good fit. That's never been Cam Newton just isn't a good fit in Bill Belichick's system. He's not quite the Bill Belichick kind of guy, if you ask me. And maybe since Cam Newton hasn't been in the spotlight the last 2 years, maybe as a guy he's changed because as you were saying, his whole Super Bowl post interview, and when he was on the top of the league, he kind of was a pompous prick. Now he does do a lot of off the field work and I appreciate it, but the on field personality of Cam Newton prior to this injury and everything was a bit pompous. Now we know Bill Belichick doesn't stand for guys like that. The Patriots don't stand for guys like that.
Yeah, you stand straight in line, soldier, and you follow the directions of the sergeant, exactly, or you're going to be punished for it.
Exactly. So, but that's where I see him going. And you mentioned the Redskins earlier too, and that makes sense. An African American quarterback backing up another African American quarterback, and that probably gives Cam Newton the best chance to take that job. He's played under Ron Rivera before. Going there, because Dwayne Haskins, if you ask me, he's a bust. He's not going to be a good quarterback in this league. I don't see anything in him. There was rumors going on this offseason that they were looking to already move on from Dwayne Haskins, and that he might be this year's Josh Rosen, et cetera, et cetera. But I feel like that would be a good place for Cam Newton to go because you have the familiarity with the head coach, and in addition, you probably have a pretty good chance to get starting time.
Yeah, and when we
What do you
say an
think?
African American backs up an African American, we mean like in this time it'd be nice for, you know, an African American to uplift another one, and if he's not, then he becomes the starter
Right.
and whatnot.
And it'd be a good look for the NFL as a whole as well,
Yeah,
because we're starting to see the NFL side with the players and like, okay, we need to sit back and listen to them now.
yeah,
And I feel like that's something that the NFL would promote.
yeah. I totally agree. If you ask me, there's four teams he belongs with. That's the Patriots, the Cardinals, the Steelers, and the Redskins. Um, if he's starting, it's obviously the Patriots, right? The other three teams, he's not starting there. If he goes to the he needs. It's weird to say because I want Newton to be starting this year, but the reality is that he might not, just considering where the NFL is at. If you remember 2 years ago, like everybody needed a quarterback. If I remember,
Mm-hmm.
it felt like everyone needed a quarterback, and now like
Right.
nobody needs a quarterback. And that's just kind of what happens, right? When you fill up the
Mm-hmm.
market, there's no demand for it later. I
Right.
really, really think he would benefit Kyler Murray. Maybe not necessarily in like teaching him how to run his system, but I think leadership wise, he would probably help Kyler. I think being able to help him read defenses, that would help out a lot. I think Kyler Murray is obviously a way superior quarterback, and Newton would never get the chance. I think he'd help out Haskins a lot, right? Same thing. But if Haskins ended up not being it, he could replace Haskins, or even like I was saying, the Steelers. I think it'd be a fantastic thing to be able to
Mm-hmm.
back up a guy who's been injured the last couple of seasons
Right.
and has said that he's contemplating retirement. Now he would have to accept backup money from all these teams, all of
Right. And
them.
that's something I've mentioned. Is he willing to really do that? Because all those teams are kind of handcuffed when it comes to cap space as well. So that's why this situation with Cam Newton's kind of tough because he doesn't really have a lot of options. And then the options that he does have, there's not a lot of good fits for him in his long-term success. So that's why it's tough for Cam Newton, and there's not a lot he could do. And I know he's kind of willing and ready to wait it out, and I don't expect him to end on a roster until probably training camp. But where he's going to end up is tough to put a finger on at this point because, like you said, no team really needs a quarterback, and I felt like his best shot was with the Bears, and now that's been long gone for a while now. So it's tough for him.
Yeah, if you ask me, I think, and it's weird because obviously he didn't get injured like RG3 did. I think he should take the RG3 route, go to be a backup, take backup money for 1 year, right? And next
Mm-hmm.
year when the market potentially opens up for quarterbacks, because who knows what it's going to look like next year, right? We don't know if Ben retires. We don't know if Rivers retires. We don't know if Tom Brady gets a massive injury and Tom Brady says, you know what, I can't make it till 55. I'm done. We
Mm-hmm.
don't know if Drew Brees retires. Like there's a lot of we don't know. What else do we not know? We don't know if Sam Darnold absolutely flutters and the Jets say we're done. There's a lot that could go on, right? After next year,
Right.
the Rams will be free from Jared Goff. Like there are so many teams I
Mm-hmm.
can name right now that could potentially want a quarterback next year.
Yeah, it's just this offseason wasn't a good offseason for the quarterback market. Like there wasn't a lot of teams that needed a quarterback, and the ones that did, they either addressed it through the draft or did a trade like the Bears.
Yeah, will the Titans want Ryan Tannehill? Was he just a 1 year comeback guy? You know, we
Mm-hmm.
don't know. So I genuinely believe that it was a stroke of bad luck for the quarterback market for him. I kind of said at the beginning of this year. I firmly believe he deserves to be on a team. I don't think this is going to be like where it was with Kaepernick. He's a running style quarterback with some accuracy issues who gets lowballed um, because of his skin color. Um, I mean, Newton's been, active about his voice. Newton's also lucky in the time where the NFL is being more accepting of that, and the commissioner even said we were
Right.
wrong. So that helps him. But I don't think he's getting lowballed, simply because he's an African American quarterback. I think he's getting lowballed because the market doesn't need a quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
And you could argue teams like the Bengals and the Chargers did, but do you want to get a guy who's been injured, or do you want to start over with Justin Herbert or Joe Burrow? And the obvious answer is you want to start over with Justin Herbert or Joe Burrow. Now, the Dolphins, the reason I'm not including them is because Tua's gotten hurt too, so who knows what's going on there. But yeah, so I feel really bad for Newton. But like I said, I think he needs to take the RG3 route. He needs to take backup money for a year and then assess the market the following year. I mean, that's what RG3 was doing, and RG3 said he still wants to start, but he's also said he recognizes where he's at and that he is happy, backing up for a team that has Lamar Jackson and fits his schematics. And I think that's why I like the Cardinals for him. I think that would really benefit Newton. I don't think Newton can fully thrive in that kind of system, but it's more of his type of system than, let's say, the Patriots or the Steelers.
Right.
Just my opinion. Obviously, we just named these 4 teams, and he's going to go to someone else that's not even those 4 teams. That's how it usually works, right? You speculate all you want, and then it doesn't happen. Who knows? Maybe the Eagles get a third quarterback, and they say they have a really great trio.
Jeez.
Could you imagine?
Trade Carson Wentz already.
No, I didn't say trade Carson Wentz.
I know.
I just said.
But that would be just do it. Just do it already. We know you want to.
So, real quick question.
But that's about all.
Since we're on it, if the Cardinals did announce they signed him for, let's say, $4 million, and you guys have $9 million, would you be upset by that?
I mean, I certainly wouldn't hate it. I feel like we're already set at the backup quarterback position with a guy like Brett Hundley. He's a local guy. And in his appearance last year, he played really, really well and led us to a victory in Seattle. So for me, I just think it's unnecessary. I don't see the fit, and I feel like, again, just Cam Newton wants to go to a place where he can feel like he can compete for the starting role, and I don't want Kyler to feel threatened in any way. And I feel like he wouldn't, but just like and you're probably right, but I don't want any animosity in that way, period. And I just don't really see the fit. Well, like I can see the fit, but like to me, in the grand scheme, it doesn't make much sense. And I feel like they could address more important positions on that roster with that little money, like a safety or an end.
I really wish I could talk to Cam Newton because I really want to know like where his mindset is at about it. Like,
I just want to know where his health is, man.
Well, he had a physical, and apparently it was fine, but, physicals aren't always the telltale case of.
And just passing a physical doesn't mean you're in great football shape.
Yeah. So I hope Cam Newton, gets back to his starting position soon enough. I really hope, some team signs with him and he gets a chance to show us things. And even if he doesn't, I hope he gets him to be a backup for a spot that is good for him. I think the natural scenario would be to go back to Ron Rivera, but maybe he needs a head coaching change. When you look at what he did with Ron Rivera, they only had, I think it was 3 winning seasons out of 9 that Ron Rivera is there, which is weird because Rivera is considered a great coach, but only had 3 winning seasons. Totally weird. Mm-hmm. So I think that's going to be it for what we got on Newton, and that's also what we got for the whole episode. We reached our hour and a half mark again.
Yes, sir.
And you were worried we wouldn't reach it.
I know. I felt like we wouldn't have enough content here, but I felt like, we did a pretty good job.
No, I felt like there was going to be enough to talk about between you and me that we'd take up some time. And I knew Newton and Clowney would probably take up more time than the other people did, and they did. So that is it from us. As usual, you can follow us on Twitter, HCAnalysist. You can also follow Pardue. I'll put his stuff in the description below, and also as the credits are rolling right now where it should be. So, you got anything else, or are we all good to go?
That should be it. I hope everybody has a great week. Stay safe, stay healthy. Yeah. Yeah. Don't catch the Rona.
Don't catch the Rona.
Me and Sanders are going on vacation now, so...
Are you going on vacation?
Yeah, I'm heading up to Sedona this weekend. I'm taking a couple days.
Alrighty, enjoy your time. I will enjoy my time in middle of nowhere, Missouri. So I won't be at risk. I won't be at risk either. So that's a cool thing.
Yeah, so don't enjoy the weather enjoy the nice non-dryness and no wildfire.
Yeah, I forgot you like the humidity.
Yeah.
That's why you
All right.
That's why you're moving away to Ohio. Anyway, to everyone listening, thank you so much for tuning in. We will see you guys on the next episode next week. Have a great time till then.